They built 96 homes on my private land, and they were already selling them like I didn't exist. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. My name is Russell Hayes, and I've spent most of my life minding my own business, which is probably why they thought I'd be easy to erase. The land in question wasn't just dirt to me. It was 42 acres of dense Colorado woodland my father left behind, untouched, quiet, the kind of place where the wind through the pines sounded like it had something to say if you just stood still long enough. I hadn't been back in 2 years. Life got complicated, divorce, long hours consulting for infrastructure firms, the kind of distractions that pull you away from things that matter until one day you realize how far you've drifted. But I never stopped paying the taxes. Not once. Every April, like clockwork. That matters, more than most people realize. The morning I drove back up there, I remember thinking how familiar the road felt, until it didn't. About 3 miles before the old dirt turnoff, fresh asphalt appeared under my tires, smooth, black, new. That was the first sign something was wrong. Then came the street signs. Silver Creek Estates. White lettering, polished, permanent. I slowed down, confusion settling in my chest like cold weight. I checked my GPS twice. Same coordinates. Same parcel. My land. But what I saw when I crested that hill, that wasn't forest anymore. It was a neighborhood. 96 homes. Rows of them, stucco walls, identical driveways. SUVs parked out front. Kids' bikes on sidewalks that hadn't existed the last time I stood there. The smell hit me first. Fresh paint, cut lumber, hot asphalt baking under the sun. Then the sound, power tools whining in the distance, a lawnmower humming, someone laughing like everything here belonged. I pulled over, engine still running, just staring, trying to reconcile memory with reality. The oak tree my dad used to sit under, gone. The creek bend where I learned to fish, redirected, boxed in with concrete like it had been tamed. I stepped out of the truck slowly, boots crunching against gravel that hadn't been there before, and that's when the security gate slid open ahead of me with a mechanical hum. A man in a uniform stepped out of small guard booth, clipboard in hand, expression already halfway to annoyed. "Residents only," he said, not even asking who I was. I let that hang in the air for a second. Then I said, calm as I could manage, "I own this land." He didn't even blink. Just gave me that tight little smile people use when they've already decided who you are. "Yeah," he said, and "I'm the governor." That's when I saw her. White Range Rover gliding up behind him like it was part of the scenery. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd never once been told no in her life. Perfect hair, designer sunglasses, posture like she owned not just the neighborhood, but the ground it sat on. She didn't rush. People like her never do. She approached with slow, deliberate steps, heels clicking against the pavement, each one echoing louder than it should have. "Is there a problem?" she asked, eyes sliding over me, boots, worn jacket, dust on my truck, cataloging, judging. The guard gestured toward me. Claims he owns the property. She actually laughed. Not loud, just enough to make sure I heard it. "Oh," she said, tilting her head slightly, "one of those." Then she turned to me, smile sharp as glass. "Listen carefully," she said, voice smooth, controlled. "This development is fully permitted, fully sold, and fully protected. Whatever fantasy you're entertaining, it ends here." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there looking past her at the 96 homes sitting squarely on land I knew down to the inch. And in that moment, something settled inside me. Not anger. Not panic, something colder, more precise, because I realized exactly what they had done, and more importantly, I realized they had already gone too far to undo it quietly. So I nodded, turned around, got back in my truck, and drove away without another word. Because sometimes the most dangerous move you can make is letting people believe they've already won. By the end of that week, I knew 2 things for certain. The woman at the gate wasn't improvising, and whatever had happened on my land had been planned long enough for arrogance to harden into routine. I spent the next several days doing what people like her never expect from a man in work boots and a faded truck. I stayed quiet, and I watched. I parked on the public shoulder above Silver Creek Estates every morning just after sunrise, coffee in a thermos, legal pad on the passenger's seat, and I learned the rhythm of the place. Delivery trucks rolled in before 8. Contractors handled punch list repairs until noon. Real estate agents floated from driveway to driveway with those bright, rehearsed smiles. Families toured model homes carrying bottled water and hope. It all looked clean, successful, finished enough to impress strangers. That was the point. They weren't building anymore. They were closing, selling, occupying, turning theft into community one mortgage at a time. On the fourth day, I watched a young couple unload patio furniture into a house that sat exactly where my father used to stack firewood for winter. I remember gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles blanched. Not because of them. They were buyers, not conspirators. They had no idea. That was what made the whole thing so vicious. Whoever orchestrated this had wrapped the crime in landscaping, escrow paperwork, and smiling brochures. By Friday afternoon, I finally had her name. A contractor mentioned it while talking near the mailbox cluster, not realizing I was close enough to hear. Ms. Waverly wants the West cul-de-sac perfect before Sunday's community event. Elaine Waverly. I wrote it down. The next morning, I got my invitation without ever being asked. Bright banners appeared near the entrance. Welcome homeowners. Grand opening celebration. Catered lunch. Live music. Community remarks at 1 o'clock. It was exactly the kind of public performance a person like Elaine would adore, a stage, an audience, and plenty of witnesses to her own importance. So I shaved, put on a clean pearl snap shirt, and drove back down there just before noon. Nobody stopped me at first. The gate was open, balloons tied to white posts, and golf carts buzzed along the main road, carrying volunteers in matching polos. Children ran across fresh-cut grass. The smell of grilled burgers drifted through the air, mixed with mulch, sunscreen, and new concrete warming under the sun. If you didn't know better, it looked wholesome, American even. But every square foot under those polished shoes still belonged to me. I walked toward the clubhouse they'd built near the center of the subdivision. My subdivision, whether any of them knew it or not. A crowd had gathered under a tent beside the pool. Maybe 100 people. Some were homeowners, some were prospective buyers, some were local officials pretending not to notice how cozy they looked with the developers. And there she was, Elaine Waverly, standing near the podium in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my first truck, one hand wrapped around microphone, the other resting lightly on the shoulder of some city planning guy who laughed too hard at whatever she just said. She saw me before I got 10 feet in. Her smile disappeared instantly. You could actually watch the calculation pass through her face, recognition, irritation, then something theatrical. She didn't come down to speak privately. Of course not. She lifted the microphone instead. Well, she said, voice carrying over the speakers, look who decided to join us. Conversations around the tent slowed, then stopped. 100 eyes turned at once. That's the thing about humiliation. People don't need instructions. They can smell it forming in the air. I kept walking until I reached the edge of the crowd. Elaine stepped fully onto the platform, smiling now because she had an audience. Sir, she said, in that poisonously polite tone people use when they want to cut your legs out from under you in public. This is a private event for homeowners and invited guests. A few people glanced at me, then at my truck in the distance, then back at her. I could see exactly what story they were being encouraged to believe. Drifter, agitator, some resentful local trying to stir trouble now that the nice development had brought in money. I said, evenly, I came to ask one question. Who authorized construction on this parcel? The silence that followed was thin and sharp. Elaine gave a little laugh and turned toward the audience as though I'd delivered a joke on cue. There it is, she said. The same delusion my office was warned about. And she looked straight at me. For everyone's peace of mind, let me be perfectly clear. Silver Creek Estates was lawfully acquired, lawfully developed, and lawfully sold. Every inch of this community is protected by title review, county approval, and binding contracts. She started walking slowly along the front of the platform, speaking to the crowd, but aiming every word at me. Sometimes, she said, when neglected land is finally put to proper use, certain people come out of the woodwork hoping to cash in on progress they did. Nothing to create. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the audience. One man in a blazer folded his arms. A woman beside him whispered something and shook her head at me like she'd already decided what kind of man I was. Elaine kept going, because people like her never stop when they feel the room leaning their way. "This gentleman," she said, "has already been advised that any attempt to interfere with homeowners, sales operations, or community access will be treated as trespass and harassment." She said gentleman like it was an insult dressed in silk. Then she smiled, wide, composed, merciless. "And for the record, 96 families have purchased homes here. 96. So whatever story you've built in your head, it is over." That got applause. Actual applause. I stood there and listened to strangers clap on land my father paid taxes on for 31 years. I let them. I let Elaine Waverly enjoy every second of it, because that moment told me something priceless. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. She believed the paperwork behind her was strong enough to survive sunlight. She believed public confidence was the same thing as legal ownership. And most of all, she believed I would either explode in anger or slink away in embarrassment. I did neither. I looked up at her, really looked, and gave the smallest nod. Then I turned, walked back through the parted crowd, and left her standing there in the middle of her manufactured kingdom, smiling for people who had no idea they were applauding the opening act of a disaster. What Elaine Waverly did next told me everything I needed to know about how far she was willing to go, and how confident she was that no one could touch her. By Monday morning, Silver Creek Estates had a new narrative, and I was the villain in it. It started subtle, just a few posts on a local community Facebook group. Someone shared a blurry photo of my truck parked near the entrance with a caption about suspicious individuals attempting to disrupt a private development. Within hours, the comments multiplied. People speculated. Some claimed I'd been seen arguing with staff. Others suggested I was trying to scam homeowners out of money. By Tuesday, my name, Russell Hayes, was floating through threads I'd never joined, attached to words like trespasser, fraud, and unstable. Elaine didn't need to say it herself. She had already built a system that would say it for her. Then came the official version. A polished statement appeared on the HOA's website and was emailed to every resident. Silver Creek Estates has recently encountered an individual making false claims regarding property ownership. Our legal team has confirmed these claims are without merit. Residents are advised not to engage and to report any further disturbances. Clean, controlled, final. The kind of language that shuts down questions before they can form. I read it sitting at my kitchen table, the morning light cutting across stacks of documents I'd started pulling from storage. Tax receipts, survey maps, old correspondence. The smell of aged paper and dust filled the room, grounding me in something real while the outside world twisted itself into something else entirely. By Wednesday, they escalated. I received a certified letter, hand-delivered, signature required. Inside was a formal notice from their attorneys. Not a warning, not a request to demand. Cease all defamatory assertions of ownership. Refrain from entering or approaching the development. Any further interference would result in immediate legal action for damages, harassment, and loss of business. The phrasing was deliberate, heavy, intimidating, meant to overwhelm. But beneath all that language, there was something missing. No direct refutation of ownership. No clear chain of title laid out. Just confidence and pressure. I set the letter down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. They weren't trying to prove they were right. They were trying to make sure I never got the chance to prove they were wrong. That distinction mattered. On Thursday afternoon, I decided to test something. I drove back, not inside the gates, just close enough to be seen, and parked along the public access road again. This time, it took less than 5 minutes. A black SUV pulled up beside me. 2 men stepped out, plain clothes, but the posture gave them away. Not law enforcement, private security, or something adjacent. One of them tapped lightly on my window. "You've been advised to stay away," he said, voice low, controlled. "You're creating unnecessary tension for residents." I looked at him, then at the neighborhood stretching out behind him, lawns trimmed to perfection, curtains drawn just enough to hide the people inside. Unnecessary, I repeated. He didn't respond. Just held my gaze like this was already settled. I nodded slowly, rolled the window up, and drove away without another word. Again, and that's when Elaine made her boldest move yet. Friday morning, I got a call. Not from her, not from her lawyers, from the county clerk's office. The woman on the line sounded hesitant, like she was stepping into something she didn't fully understand. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "we've received a request to review your property status under abandonment and redevelopment provisions. There's been a petition filed." I sat up straighter. By who? A pause. Papers shuffling. Silver Creek Development Group, represented by Elaine Waverly. There it was. Not just PR, not just intimidation. They were trying to formalize the lie, turn it into something stamped, processed, and buried under enough paperwork that no one would question it again. "And what does that review involve?" I asked. "If approved," she said carefully, "it could validate their claim to the land based on continued development and occupancy." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly the kind of overreach that breaks everything open. They weren't satisfied with what they'd taken. They needed it to be permanent, official, untouchable. And in doing that, they had just moved this out of whispers and into the one place where facts don't bend. A courtroom. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there in silence for a long moment. Then I reached for the oldest document in the stack, the one wrapped in a worn leather folder my father had kept locked away for decades. I hadn't opened it yet. Didn't need to, not until now. Because up until this point, they'd been fighting a man they thought they understood. After what they just filed, they were about to face something very different. And the thing about people who win by intimidation is they never see it coming when the fight shifts to a place where intimidation means nothing at all. The first time I saw Elaine Waverly under oath, she looked exactly the same as she had at that podium. Perfectly composed, perfectly certain, and completely convinced she was the smartest person in the room. The deposition took place in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Denver, the kind of place designed to feel expensive without saying a word about it. Long polished table, bottled water lined up like props. A court reporter seated quietly at the corner, fingers hovering over the keys, waiting to turn every word into something permanent. Elaine sat across from me, in a tailored navy suit this time, less showy than the cream one, but sharper, more deliberate. Her attorney sat beside her, flipping through a binder thick enough to suggest confidence. Mightn't need one that thick. Not yet. The air smelled faintly of leather and coffee, controlled, sterile, like the room itself was built to strip emotion out of whatever happened inside it. But Elaine brought her own atmosphere with her. That same quiet superiority. That same belief that this was all just another performance she would win. For the record, her attorney began, "Ms. Waverly, can you state your role in Silver Creek Estates?" She didn't hesitate. "I am the acting president of the Silver Creek Homeowners Association and a managing partner in Silver Creek Development Group." Her voice was steady, practiced. "And are you familiar with the acquisition of the land on which the development sits?" A slight smile touched her lips. "Intimately." I watched her carefully. Not just what she said, but how she said it. No hositashchen, no question, just momentum. That's the thing about people who've gotten away with something long enough. They stop recognizing where the line is. "Can you explain how the land was obtained?" her attorney asked. Elaine leaned forward slightly, hands folded on the table like she was delivering a keynote speech. The parcel in question was abandoned for a significant period of time. No active use, no visible maintenance, and no interference with development access. Based on that status, our legal team determined it qualified for redevelopment under state provisions. We followed all appropriate channels. The phrase hung in the air like it meant something more than it did. My attorney didn't interrupt. Not yet. He let her keep talking. "And to your knowledge," her attorney continued, "were there any legitimate ownership claims presented prior to or during construction?" Elaine let out a soft, almost amused breath. "None that held any legal weight." She glanced at me then, just for a second. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for me to see it. That flicker of dismissal. Like I was already behind her. Like this was already over. The court reporter's keys clicked steadily, capturing every word. That mattered. Every word under oath becomes something you can't take back later. So to be clear, her attorney pressed, Silver Creek Development Group acted in full compliance with property law. Yes, Elaine said without pause. Absolutely. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, irreversible step forward. Because what she had just done was lie. Not casually, not vaguely, specifically, completely, and under oath. My attorney finally leaned forward, sliding a single document across the table toward her. Ms. Waverly, he said, voice calm, almost conversational, before we proceed further, I'd like to clarify one point. Elaine glanced down at the paper, then back up, expression unchanged. Of course. You testified that the property was abandoned, he continued. Can you define what you mean by abandoned in this context? She straightened slightly, clearly expecting something simpler. A lack of active ownership presence. No maintenance. No engagement with the land. My attorney nodded slowly, like he was agreeing. And in your understanding, does the payment of property taxes constitute engagement? There it was. Subtle. Surgical. Elaine hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Then she recovered. Not necessarily, she said. It depends on the totality of circumstances. My attorney didn't react. He simply reached into his folder and placed another document on the table. Then another. Then another. Each one aligned carefully in front of her. These, he said, are certified county records of property tax payments on the parcel in question. Continuous. Annual. Never delinquent. Elaine's eyes moved across the pages. I watched the shift, small but real. The first crack in that perfect composure. And just to confirm, he added, these payments span the entire period during which your development was planned, permitted, and constructed. Silence stretched for a moment longer than it should have. The room felt different now, less controlled. The air tighter. Elaine leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other, trying to reclaim ground that had just slipped beneath her. Our legal team evaluated all available information, she said, voice still steady, but thinner now, and determined that the property met the criteria. Not a denial, not a correction, a deflection. My attorney nodded again, as if satisfied. Of course, he said. We'll let the record reflect that. He sat back. No raised voice. No dramatic gesture. Just patience. Because the damage had already been done. Elaine Waverly had just committed to a version of reality that could not survive what was coming next. And the worst part for her, she didn't even realize it yet. She thought this was still her room. She thought this was still her narrative. She had no idea that every word she'd just spoken was about to become the foundation of something she couldn't control, couldn't spin, and couldn't escape. Elaine should have stopped talking after that first stumble. But people like her don't know how to stop when they still believe they can win. My attorney let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable, then leaned back in, voice still calm, still measured, but now carrying a sharper edge. Ms. Waverly, he said, let's shift slightly. You mentioned that Silver Creek Development Group followed all appropriate channels during acquisition and construction. I'd like to explore that. Elaine nodded a little too quickly. Of course. Specifically, he continued, sliding another set of documents across the table. Can you identify the entity that received funds from the sale of the 96 homes? Her attorney shifted beside her just slightly. That was the first sign. Sales proceeds were handled through Silver Creek Development Group. Elaine replied. Clean. Direct. Confident again. My attorney nodded. And is that entity registered as the legal owner of the land at the time those transactions occurred? A pause, longer this time. Not hesitation from confusion. Hesitation from calculation. To my understanding, yes, she said. My attorney didn't respond immediately. He simply opened a thinner folder, one that hadn't been touched yet, and turned it toward her. This, he said, is the registered ownership record for the parcel during the entire development period. Elaine's eyes moved across the page. Then again, slower. You'll notice, he continued, that Silver Creek Development Group is not listed as owner at any point. The air in the room shifted again, subtle but undeniable. Her attorney leaned forward now, finally breaking his stillness. "We object to the characterization. You can object later," my attorney said evenly, not raising his voice. "Right now, I'm asking your client a question." He turned back to Elaine. "If your company was not the legal owner, on what authority were these homes sold?" That landed, not like a hammer, more like a lock clicking into place. Elaine straightened, her posture tightening, the confidence now forced instead of natural. "We operated under a good faith belief of ownership," she said, "based on legal review." My attorney tilted his head slightly. "Good faith." He repeated it like he was testing the weight of the words. Then he reached for another document. "Let's talk about that review." He placed a printed email chain in front of her, highlighted, time-stamped. "This is correspondence between you and your financial officer, dated 3 months before construction began. In it, you state, and I quote, 'We need to move fast before the title issue surfaces. Once units are sold, it becomes a settlement problem, not an ownership problem.'" The room went completely still. Even the court reporter paused for half a second before continuing. Elaine didn't touch the paper this time. She just looked at it. Her attorney leaned in again, voice lower now, more urgent. "Don't answer that." But the damage was already there, printed, highlighted, undeniable. My attorney didn't press immediately. He let breathe, let it sink into the room. Then he spoke again, softer this time, almost conversational. "Ms. Waverly, were you aware at the time of sale that your company did not hold clear title to the land?" Silence. Real silence now. Not strategic, not controlled, just absence. Elaine's composure cracked. Not dramatically, not outwardly, but in the small ways that matter. A shift in her shoulders. A tightening around her eyes. The kind of cracks that don't show up in headlines, but show up in transcripts. "We relied on counsel," she said finally. My attorney nodded slowly. "Of course you did." He flipped another page forward. "And yet, according to these financial records, proceeds from those sales, approximately $16 million, were routed through 3 separate accounts before being consolidated into a holding entity registered under your personal trust." Her attorney's chair scraped slightly against the floor. "We're going to need to take a break." "No," my attorney said, still calm, still controlled. "We're going to finish this line of questioning." He looked directly at Elaine. "Can you explain why residential sales funds were transferred through multiple intermediary accounts before reaching your trust?" Elaine's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. That was new. That was different. Because this wasn't about property anymore. This was about money. Movement of money. Structure of money. The kind of questions that don't stay in civil court for long. "Standard financial structuring," she said finally, the words thinner now, less certain. My attorney nodded again, but this time there was no softness left in it. "Standard," he repeated, "including the account flagged last quarter for irregular reporting to the IRS." That did it. Her attorney stood halfway up. "Now, we are done here." My attorney didn't argue. Didn't need to. He simply closed the folder, fingers resting lightly on top of it. "That's fine," he said. "We can continue this in federal court." And just like that, the room changed completely. Because up until this moment, Elaine Waverly thought she was fighting a property dispute. A messy one, maybe, but manageable. What she was actually sitting in was the early stages of a federal fraud case. And for the first time since I'd met her, she looked like she understood that. The room didn't empty right away after that exchange, but something in it had shifted so completely that even silence felt heavier. Elaine stayed seated for a moment longer than necessary, her fingers resting against the table, perfectly still, like if she didn't move, the situation might somehow hold in place. Her attorney leaned in close, whispering something sharp and urgent, the kind of tone that doesn't bother hiding frustration anymore. But Elaine didn't respond right away. She just stared at the documents in front of her, the email, the financial records, the chain that connected everything she had tried so carefully to separate. When she finally stood, it wasn't with the same polished confidence she'd walked in with. It was controlled, but tight. Calculated. "We're done here," her attorney said again, louder this time, signaling the end of the deposition. Chairs shifted. Papers were gathered. The court reporter began organizing her notes, the quiet clicking of keys replaced by the soft shuffle of closure. But before anyone could fully disengage, my attorney spoke again, calm, deliberate, and just loud enough to cut through the movement. "Ms. Waverly," he said. She paused, didn't turn immediately. That alone told me she already knew what was coming next. Slowly, she faced him again, chin slightly raised, that familiar edge returning to her expression. Fragile now, but still there. "Yes." My attorney didn't rush. He placed both hands flat on the table, leaning forward just enough to make it clear this wasn't a casual remark. "You're still under oath," he said. The room stilled again, not fully but enough. Enough for the weight of that sentence to land exactly where it needed to. Elaine's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm aware." He nodded once. "Then I'm going to ask you something very simple." A pause. Measured. Intentional. "Do you wish to amend or clarify any part of your testimony before this record is presented in federal court?" There it was. The final door. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just open waiting. For a moment, just a moment, you could see the calculation return her eyes. Not the earlier arrogance, something sharper. Survival instinct, maybe. The realization that this wasn't just about control anymore. That there were consequences now, real ones. Her attorney leaned in again, whispering urgently, almost insistently. This time, I caught a fragment. "You need to." Elaine raised a hand, just slightly, and he stopped. That was her answer before she even spoke. She straightened fully, smoothing an invisible crease from her sleeve, rebuilding herself piece by piece in real time. When she looked back at my attorney, the arrogance was back. Not because it was justified, but because it was all she had left. "No," she said. Clear, firm, final. My attorney didn't react, didn't interrupt. He just waited. Elaine let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, and shook her head faintly, like the entire situation was beneath her. "I think what's happening here," she continued, voice steady again, "is that you're trying to manufacture a narrative out of incomplete information." She gestured lightly toward the documents. Selective emails, misinterpreted financial structures. It's creative. Creative. The word hung there, dismissive, polished, practiced. "Silver Creek Estates is a legitimate development," she went on, her tone sharpening just enough to carry that edge of condescension again. 96 families live there. 96 contracts have been executed. Lenders, inspectors, county officials, all of them reviewed and approved this project. She tilted her head slightly. "Do you really expect anyone to believe that all of that just slipped through the cracks?" She didn't wait for an answer. Didn't need one. "This," she said, with a faint, almost amused smile, "is what happens when someone realizes they missed their opportunity and tries to rewrite the story after the fact." There was again that same narrative she'd used from the beginning. I was late. I was irrelevant. I was trying to take something that no longer belonged to me. The difference now was that she was saying it under oath. My attorney let the silence sit for a beat longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Very well," he said. "No argument. No correction. Just acceptance." And somehow, that was worse. Elaine seemed to sense it too, but instead of stepping back, she leaned into it. "You're out of your depth here," she added, eyes flicking toward me for the briefest second. "Both of you." There was a faint smile now, colder than before. "And when this is over, I hope you're prepared for the consequences of making these kinds of accusations." That was it. The last chance closed by her own hand. My attorney simply gathered the documents, stacking them neatly, methodically. "We are," he said quietly. No emphasis, no threat, just certainty. Elaine turned then, finally breaking eye contact, and walked toward the door. Heels clicking softly against the polished floor, each step carrying the same confidence she'd entered with but none of the control. Because what she didn't understand, what she couldn't allow herself to understand, was that this was never about convincing her, or even winning this room. It was about creating a record, a permanent, undeniable record of exactly what she had just chosen to say. And with that one word, no, she had sealed it. Not just the case, not just the outcome, but the path that would take everything she'd built and collapse it under the weight of her own voice. The courtroom was quieter than I expected, but not calm. There's a difference. Calm is controlled, predictable. This was something else entirely. Charged, focused. Like every person in that room understood, at some level, that what was about to happen wasn't just another civil dispute. It was a reckoning. Elaine Waverly sat at the defense table in a tailored charcoal suit this time. No bright colors, no showmanship. Her posture was still upright, still deliberate, but the edges were gone. The confidence she'd worn so effortlessly before had thinned into something tighter, more fragile. Across from her, I sat beside my attorney, a single folder in front of me, older than anything else in that room, worn at the corners, sealed with a kind of quiet authority that didn't need polish. The judge entered without ceremony. The kind of man who didn't waste time on theatrics because he didn't need them. Once everyone was seated, the proceedings began, motions, summaries, procedural language that moved quickly, efficiently. Elaine's attorney spoke first, laying out the same narrative they'd been pushing from the beginning. Good faith development, procedural compliance, reliance on legal review. He was smooth, practiced, but even he avoided certain specifics now. That was new. My attorney stood next. No theatrics. No raised voice. Just precision. Your Honor, he said, this case is not about a misunderstanding. It is about the unlawful sale of property that was never owned by the party conducting those sales and the deliberate concealment of that fact through structured financial transactions. The room didn't react outwardly, but you could feel it land. The judge nodded once. Proceed. That was all the permission we needed. My attorney didn't start with the deed. Not yet. He started with the money. Bank records were introduced, clean, organized, undeniable. Funds from 96 home sales, millions of dollars, moving through layered accounts, transferred, consolidated, redirected. The kind of pattern that doesn't happen by accident. The kind that triggers questions, federal questions. Elaine watched as each document appeared on the screen. Transaction chains, timestamps, account holders. Her face remained still, but her eyes moved faster now, tracking, recalculating. Then came the emails. The same ones from the deposition, but now projected, enlarged, impossible to minimize. The highlighted lines sat there in stark contrast. Once units are sold, it becomes a settlement problem, not an ownership problem. A murmur rippled through the room, quickly silenced, but enough. Enough to shift perception. Elaine's attorney objected. Of course he did, but the judge allowed it. Relevance was no longer a question. This wasn't about interpretation anymore. It was about intent. And then, finally, my attorney reached for the folder in front of me. He didn't open it right away. He let the room settle first. Let the weight of everything already presented sink in. Then, carefully, deliberately, he broke the seal and withdrew a single document. Aged, official, untouched by the noise of everything that had come after it. Your Honor, he said, stepping forward, this is the original deed to the parcel in question, recorded in 1974, maintained in continuous legal standing, and never transferred, relinquished, or invalidated. He placed it on the evidence stand. The clerk took it, verified it, handed it to the judge. And that's what happened. Elaine leaned forward, just slightly, trying to see it before it reached the bench. Her attorney leaned in too, whispering quickly now, urgently. But it didn't matter. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanned the document, then looked up. Not at me, not my attorney. At Elaine. Ms. Waverly, he said, voice even, controlled. This document indicates continuous ownership by Mr. Hayes throughout the entire period of development. A pause. Not long, but absolute. Do you have any evidence to dispute this? That was the moment. The exact moment everything she had built, every assumption, every calculated risk, every layer of confidence, collapsed under the weight of something she could no longer talk around. Elaine opened her mouth just slightly, closed it, looked at her attorney, looked back at the judge, and for the first time since I had ever seen her, there was no performance left. No narrative, no control, just realization. Her face didn't fall dramatically. It didn't need to. It drained. Color fading, tension replacing it. The kind of stillness that comes when the mind finally catches up to the consequences. 96 homes. Sold. On land she never owned. $16 million moved through accounts, now sitting in evidence. Statements made under oath, contradicted by documents she couldn't explain away. And the man she had dismissed, minimized, publicly humiliated, was now the one holding the one piece of paper that ended all of it. The irony wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was absolute. Her attorney tried to speak, something about further review, about procedural clarification, but the judge raised a hand. Silence. I believe we've seen enough for today, he said. His eyes moved briefly across the courtroom, then settled again. This matter will proceed under expanded review. Expanded review. In that room, those two words carried weight far beyond their tone, because everyone understood what they meant. This was no longer just a property dispute. It was something larger. Federal. Permanent. Elaine sat back slowly, hands now gripping the edge of the table. Not out of composure, but because there was nothing left to hold on to. And as the courtroom began to shift, papers gathering, people rising, I remained exactly where I was. Calm. Still. Watching. Because this was the moment she finally understood. Not just that she had lost, but who she had been fighting all along. And more importantly, what that meant for everything that came next. The fallout didn't take weeks. It didn't even take days. It started before the courtroom had fully emptied. Two men in dark suits stepped through the side entrance. Not rushed, not dramatic, just precise. Federal agents. You could tell by the way they moved, like everything had already been decided somewhere else. Elaine saw them at the same time her attorney did. That was the moment the last illusion broke. Not when the judge spoke. Not when the deed was read. But when she realized this wasn't contained anymore. One of the agents approached the bench first. Quiet exchange, credentials presented, a brief nod from the judge. Procedure. Clean. Official. Then they turned toward her. Ms. Waverly, one of them said, voice calm, almost polite, "We need you to come with us." No accusation in the tone. No raised voice. Just certainty. Her attorney stepped in immediately, words spilling out faster now. "We'll need to review. This is highly irregular." My client, the agent, didn't argue. Didn't need to. "You can accompany her," he said evenly. "But she's coming with us." Elaine didn't stand right away. For a second, just a second, she stayed seated, fingers still gripping the table like if she held on tightly enough, the world might reverse itself. Then slowly she let go. The chair scraped softly as she stood, the sound carrying farther than it should have in a room that quiet. All eyes were on her now. No admiration, no applause, just recognition. This is what it looks like when the story changes. They didn't cuff her immediately. Not yet. They guided her toward the side exit first, controlled, contained. But just before she reached the door, something shifted outside. Movement, voices, the low hum of a crowd gathering faster than anyone had planned for. News travels fast when money and scandal collide. By the time they stepped into the hallway, cameras were already there. Not a full press storm, but enough. Enough lenses pointed in her direction. Enough microphones angled forward. The moment she crossed that threshold, the restraint changed. One of the agents reached gently, but firmly, and turned her toward the wall. It wasn't rough. It wasn't loud. It was worse than that. It was routine. The click of the cuffs was soft, but final. Metal against wrist. Control against resistance. Elaine Waverly, HOA president, developer, the woman who stood on a podium and declared ownership over land she never held, was now just another defendant being processed into a system that didn't care about her titles, her tone, or her confidence. Her face didn't twist in anger. It didn't collapse into tears. It did something quieter, more devastating. It emptied, because this wasn't a negotiation anymore. There was no room left for narrative, for spin, for influence. The system she had tried to manipulate had closed around her completely. Behind her, her attorney kept talking, already shifting into damage control, already calculating. But even he knew. You could see it in the way his Voice lost its edge. The numbers alone were enough. $16 million in fraudulent sales. Structured transfers through layered accounts. False representations to lenders, buyers, and county officials. And now, documented intent. Under oath. Federal fraud. Guide fraud. Financial structuring violations. The kind of charges that don't fade with time, they compound. As she was escorted down the hallway, the cameras followed, flashes cutting through the sterile light, capturing every step, every angle, every fraction of a second where power turned into exposure. Somewhere in that movement, she glanced up, not at the agents, not at the cameras, at me, just for a moment. And in that moment, there was no arrogance left. No dismissed, just understanding. Not of the case, but of the mistake. She hadn't just lost a legal battle. She had picked the wrong person to erase. Outside, the ripple effect had already begun. Accounts tied to Silver Creek Development Group were frozen within hours. Lenders initiated internal reviews, then external ones. Title companies flagged every transaction associated with the development. Buyers, those 96 families, suddenly found themselves holding contracts tied to a property that legally belonged to someone else. Lawsuits didn't trickle in. They hit all at once. Civil claims, fraud claims, emergency motions. The entire structure Elaine had built, financial, legal, reputational, collapsed under its own weight. The HOA dissolved within days. Board members resigned, some quietly, some not fast enough. The management company she had used to route funds gone. Locked, audited, exposed. And the development itself, Silver Creek Estates, became something else entirely. Not a success story, not a model community, a case study, an overreach, an arrogance, in what happens when someone confuses control with ownership and influence with immunity. Back inside the courtroom, the judge's final instructions were procedural, measured, but absolute. The case would proceed. Expanded jurisdiction, federal oversight, no ambiguity left in the path forward. And me? I didn't move right away. I stayed seated for a moment longer, watching the room empty, the echo of everything that had just happened settling into something permanent. Because this was never about spectacle. It was about record, about proof, about letting someone build their entire illusion and then dismantling it with one document they couldn't outrun. The deed had done its job. The rest was just consequence. In the weeks that followed, Silver Creek Estates stopped being a development and started becoming something real. Not overnight, not cleanly, but steadily, the way things built on truth tend to do. The legal process moved forward with the kind of quiet efficiency that doesn't make headlines, but changes everything underneath them. Federal charges were filed, formally, publicly. Elaine Waverly's name appeared not on marketing materials or HOA letters anymore, but on court dockets. Her assets, every account tied to those transactions, remained frozen. Properties linked to her personal trust were placed under review, then under lien. The system didn't rush. It didn't need to. It just closed in piece by piece until there was nowhere left for anything to hide. But for the 96 families living on my land, the story was different. They weren't criminals. There were people who had believed what they were told, signed what was placed in front of them, trusted a system that was supposed to protect them. And now they were caught in the middle of something they never saw coming. I could have forced it. Legally, I had the right. Evictions, immediate claims, full enforcement of ownership. The law would have backed me every step of the way. But standing there one morning, back on that same road where I first saw what had been built, I watched a father teaching his kid how to ride a bike on a driveway that shouldn't have existed, and I knew that wasn't the ending this needed. So I made a different decision. I met with my attorney, then with the court-appointed mediator overseeing the civil side of the case. We structured something that hadn't been part of the original fight, but became the resolution. Each homeowner was given a path to stay. Not through Elaine, not through the collapsed HOA, through me. Title corrections were initiated, clean, direct transfers that replaced the fraudulent chain with a legitimate one. Mortgages were renegotiated with lenders who, now fully aware of the situation, had little choice but to cooperate. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick, but it was right. The HOA itself didn't survive. And honestly, it shouldn't have. What replaced it wasn't another layer of control. It was something simpler. A community agreement. Transparent, voluntary, limited. No heathen fees. No manufactured authority. Just shared responsibility for the things that actually mattered. Roads, utilities, maintenance. Nothing more. The clubhouse they built. The one where Elaine stood and declared ownership like it was a fact instead of a performance. I kept it, not as a symbol of what happened, but as a reminder of what didn't happen again. We turned it into something useful. Legal workshops, once a month, basic property rights, contract literacy, the kind of information people should never have to learn the hard way. Local meetings, open records, no closed doors. The land itself changed too. Not physically, not in the way it had been forced to change before, but in how it felt. The edges of it softened. The tension that had settled into the place lifted. Slowly, quietly. The creek they had boxed in, I had it restored. Not back to exactly what it was. Time doesn't work that way, but enough to let it move again. Water has a way of reminding people what belongs to what, and what never really did. One evening, a few months later, I stood at the edge of that same property, watching the sun drop behind rows of houses that, somehow, now felt like they belonged there. Not because they were built legally the first time, but because they had been made right after. A couple walked past me, one of the original buyers. They paused, nodded. Not overly grateful, not uncomfortable, just respectful. That was enough. I didn't need anything else, because this was never about owning 96 homes. It was about making sure that ownership meant something again. That a piece of paper, one deed, one record, one truth, could still stand against everything built to ignore it. Elaine Waverly thought control was something you could take, structure, sell. She thought if you moved fast enough, spoke confidently enough, built big enough, the truth would have to adjust to you. She was wrong. The truth doesn't adjust. It waits. And when it shows up, it doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't argue. It just stands there, quiet, documented, and impossible to ignore. And in the end, that's what remains. Not the noise, not the performance, just what's real and who it truly belongs to. There is something deeply unsettling about how easily authority can be faked when it is wrapped in confidence, paperwork, and just enough complexity to discourage questions. In this story, what stands out is not only the scale of the deception, but how it relied on a simple assumption. That ordinary people would trust appearances over verification, and that no one would challenge the illusion once it was established. Elaine did not just build homes. She built a narrative, one where repetition replaced truth and momentum replaced legality. But what ultimately unraveled her was not force, anger, or spectacle. It was patience. It was documentation. It was the quiet refusal of one individual to surrender what was rightfully his, even when the entire world around him had already decided otherwise. And perhaps that is the real lesson here. Ownership is not just about land or documents. It is about responsibility. A home is not defined by walls or contracts, but by the integrity behind them. When that integrity is compromised, everything built on top of it becomes temporary, no matter how permanent it looks. What would you have done if you returned to find an entire neighborhood built on your land, and everyone around you believed it belonged to someone else? I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.